Kia ora koutou. It's now 1:20, so we'll resume the meeting of the governing body, and I hope you enjoyed your lunch. And think of those in this room that will be fighting the traffic on a long weekend to get home, so if we can finish before 7:30 tonight, that will be really good. Right, we'll begin. Did I say 7:30 or was it 3:30? 3:30. We'll begin with a roll call. So, Sandra, if I can ask you just to check we've got everybody online.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Bartley.
Present.
Councillor Casey.
Kia ora, Sandra.
Kia ora. Councillor Collins.
Kia ora, Sandra.
Kia ora. Councillor Coombe.
Kia ora, anō.
Councillor Cooper.
Aye.
Councillor Dalton.
Present, Sandra.
Thank you. Councillor Darby.
Yes.
Councillor Filipina.
Talofa.
Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Henderson.
Hello.
Councillor Hills.
Kia ora, I'm here, thank you.
Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Newman.
Good afternoon, Sandra.
Councillor Sayers.
Sorry. Present, thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
Afternoon, Sandra.
Councillor Stewart.
Present.
Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson.
Present.
Councillor Young.
Present.
And can we just check Councillor Fletcher? Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Walker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sandra, and hopefully the councillors that weren't here will be back shortly. Right, so we come to item number 11, which relates to our increased local board decision-making responsibilities for local community services. And what this paper is endeavouring to do is provide an update on the progress of the implementation of increasing those decision-making responsibilities, a summary of the consultation feedback, and to recommend the proposed changes to the allocation of decision-making for non-regulatory activities policy and local board funding policy be approved. I might ask, if I can ask maybe as chair of the working group, Councillor Newman to move and Councillor Dalton to second. Are you both in agreement to do that, please?
That's fine.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. And welcome to the table, Claudia Weiss and Justine Joseph. And I think Justine, you're going to lead off and introduce it for us, and then we'll move to questions. Justine.
Sorry, Claudia will lead on.
Oh, Claudia, sorry.
Apologies, Your Chair.
Yep.
So kia ora koutou katoa, lovely to see you all today. So I'm just starting off, and I will hand over to Justine shortly, and also Justine is on the line. Kia ora, Justine, and welcome. So this is the last and largely procedural step in a process that started in 2017 to increase local board decision-making responsibilities for local community services. You will see in the resolutions that we are seeking to update the governing body on consultation feedback from our communities, which was largely positive. And we are also asking the governing body to approve the proposed changes to the allocation table and funding policy. And that is set out in your appendix. So just some quick notes that may also be of assistance. This approval process the background is that the decisions were made in October by the governing body, and they were subject to consultation at that time. And the consultation also included consultation on the actual allocation table and funding policy. It may also be helpful to remind the governing body that the budget for this program is already included in the annual budget, so that funding aspect has been resolved as part of that process. So before I just pass over to Justine, I would like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who has been involved in this mahi since 2017, including all the members of the Joint Governance Working Party, Chair, Councillor Newman, and all of the many teams at Council who've been involved, most notably Phil Wilson, Justine, Gary Pemberton, and of course now Justine. So thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks, Claudia. In terms of feedback we only received about 120 submissions compared to the thousands we received for other items, but mostly supportive. And as Claudia mentioned, the changes to the allocation of decision-making table and the local board funding policy are just to give effect to the decisions to increase local board decision-making over local community services. Now, once these proposals are approved today, staff would start a phased implementation from the 1st of July 2022, aiming for the local board plan for local boards to make any significant changes, which then flows well into the next LTP through which we can give effect to those significant changes if there are any. The project team are also working on the multi-board service program and governance options, and also on the funding equity policy. So the governing body and the relevant future governing entity, could be the working party, we don't know, will be kept up to date on this work regularly. Local boards would also be invited to provide feedback on these items. Yep, so that's it from us today. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions. Or Justine, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Okay, I'll just check with Justine. Have you got anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's okay. Thank you.
That's good. And just to indicate, I've also got Phil Wilson here, who's just behind us, who's had a strong interest in this as well. So look, I'll open it up for questions. I think everybody's aware of the issues. We've workshopped and debated and discussed this. And so now this is the final step in the process. And I have a question, first of all, from Councillor Linda Cooper.
Sorry, I'm talking a bit today, Mr. Chair. My question is, look, I don't oppose this in principle, but my question is around the seemingly need to have a whole bunch of separate staff. And maybe I've got the wrong end of the stick, but it would seem to me that if you're making a report for, say, the PACE committee, then why isn't it just the same people doing that and they presenting it to the local board instead of having a whole lot of other staff assigned to doing this? Because I actually feel there's we've got sort of two groups rather than working together. Why can't we just use the staff we've got and they're just reporting to somebody different, a local board instead of a governing body committee? Why do we need to spend, was it $2 to $4 million a year on new staff? I don't understand it when we've already got advisors that could be helping the local boards if they need interpretation or anything like that, because I wouldn't have thought you need another person to then vet the report that came from the staff that are doing it. Yeah, I just don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me, and I think if we're going to do anything, we need to have good reasons why we're spending more money.
Right, shall I address that to Claudia?
So thank you very much for the question, and it's a good question because it's something that we've quite carefully thought through, and I know our teams have done a lot of work. So there's two aspects to our advisory services that we're looking into. One is we're currently in a process of seeking engagement from our teams on a proposal to enhance our core advisory services. And then as part of this GFR, if it is adopted, then that would mean we would look at engaging or adding to that team the additional competencies and capabilities needed to support the GFR. We are not looking to have, this is the GFR is the governance framework review. This is this paper that we're presenting today. So that, so sorry for the acronym. The governance framework review, we've put forward additional positions that is based on our best estimates of what the resourcing would be needed to be able to help this be put into effective action. And what we did not want to do is underestimate the potential resourcing because we want to make sure that we can deliver this well. There are likely to be potential opportunities, however, to be more efficient as we work through this. And we are also very mindful of how well we design it so that we don't have separate teams, but rather we have an integrated view of the recommendations that we're putting out to, or that we're putting forward to our elected members and the decisions that are made. Justine, I know that you have done a lot of work in this space. Are there any additional comments that you'd like to make, if I may, through the chair?
Thank you, Claudia. Yes, just to add a couple of comments that I think will be useful. Firstly, to just give the assurance that we have taken very strong messaging from earlier exchanges with the governing body around treating our resource estimates as an absolute maximum. So as Claudia said, we will be seeking to make sure that we are adding an additional resource where it is needed to meet business requirements, but not as just a baseline requirement. So we will be able to continue to give updates on that. And as we workshop with the governing body on the 1st of June, there is certainly some peak periods where the additional resource will be required. So for example, as we've discussed previously, the local board plans are a significant opportunity for us to agree with local boards the areas of focus for additional advisory work, and that's to enable that work to occur to get benefit out of the consultation with communities that occurs through the local board plan process, but also to make sure that we're getting ahead of long-term plan cycles. So there will be peak periods of demand for the resource, and we will be designing that appropriately rather than as a baseline requirement. The key point, I think, to remember is that one of the reasons we do believe we will need additional resources, it's not just redirecting advice that's currently provided to Kpis to local boards instead. It's actually about helping local boards understand the opportunity to manage across their funding capacity and their service provision. So we do anticipate additional complexity in the nature of advice that we will need to provide. And because we need to make sure we understand the short, medium and long-term implications of that advice, that also means that we will be really taking a long-term view on the advice that we provide, which also adds to the complexity. So just to assure you, we will be efficient in the design of that resource, but we do recognise that the complexity of advice that will be required for local boards will be increasing.
Thank you.
Yeah, probably I'd just like to follow up on that one because, you know, there's strong reasons to do this, and there are also additional costs in doing it. So my question's really twofold. I mean, we're making decisions about the same assets, but instead of making it once before governing body, we're doing it 20 times local board, 21 times local board by local board. So that, I presume, is the major reason that we'll have more staff. But in terms of, if that is the cost of it, and the benefit is devolution and localism, but is there a benefit also in terms of improving the management of those assets by doing it at a local level? So Justine, I think, was nodding her head, or Claudia. You jump in. It's a little bit hard when we do these hybrid meetings to know who I go to.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I will pass over to Justine to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, and apologies I couldn't be there in person today. Yes, absolutely. One of the benefits of this proposal is to enable us to be able to work with local boards, understand their portfolio of responsibility across local community services collectively. So as we talked about in our workshop at the beginning of June, the challenges that we have in front of us in terms of the sustainability of the community asset portfolio are challenging, and this does enable us to do work with local boards to understand how we can really importantly deliver more effectively for communities, but in a sustainable and cost-effective way through considering changes across the portfolio rather than on a service-by-service basis, as has been the approach up until now.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Al-Filipaina.
Tēnā koutou katoa, just to our staff. And look, my question is in relation to number 10 on our report. So, Claudia, you mentioned something around, well, you mentioned in your opening address that the budget has been allocated. Now, can you confirm that the budget of the 2 and 2.8 million per annum, is that budget being confirmed for the 1 year or for the 3 years, please?
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Filipina. I actually need to just seek advice from Justine on that, but I do believe it's been approved through the full 3-year programs, yes.
That's right.
Yeah, and I can see Justine nodding if you can't, Alf.
Yeah, no, and just a supplementary, Your Worship, that 2 to 2.8 million, that doesn't include the resourcing of 16 to 22 FTEs, or does it?
Thank you again for the question. It does include the full, those FTEs. So it's the actual FTEs, those estimated costs of those FTEs are what has been included in the budget. So there's no additional budget expected.
Okay, it just reads resourcing of 16 to 22 FTE and 2.0 to 2.8 per annum. So that includes the 16 to 22 FTE within between 2 and 2.8 million. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, you are correct. Thank you.
Okay, and just one last question, Your Worship. Can you just explain again why we can't do it over a year? I know there was some mention about the local board plans and the cycle that involves that, but can you just confirm why we couldn't do it over a year when, you know, we end up getting between $6 million and $8.4 million that's now, from what I've been told, is approved through the budget for 3 years?
Cool.
I'm happy to start with that, Claudia, if you like.
Right, okay, Justine.
Okay, Justine, I think.
Apologies, sorry, I have a slight delay, I think. Apologies if I'm disrupting. So thank you for the question, Councillor Filipina. The resource costs that are estimated are on an ongoing basis. So this is the proposal, or giving effect to the proposal, means that we change the way we operate going forward. So the estimate that we've provided, the 16 to 22 FTE, are our estimate of the ongoing resource requirement to support the work. And as I said, through the planning cycle, that resource will vary. So we are very much working to that as a maximum. But there will be peak periods through the local board plan process and through the LTP process where we anticipate that there will be increased advice needed for local boards. At other periods that will reduce, and so we will manage that resource accordingly.
Kia ora, thank you, Bishop.
Thank you very much. Next question is Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. My question is around how this will actually work in practice and what level of efficiency or effectiveness or more appropriate decision making may arise. So if we assume that increasingly we have facilities that are spread across multiple local boards that go to libraries and pools and sub-regional centres and BMX venues, I can think of a whole range of them, whereby you've got different local boards involved to a greater or lesser extent in each. I would really like to know how the level of decision making works in reality and does not otherwise lead to inefficiencies, potentially conflict amongst local boards, because there's an assumption that they're going to agree on things, and I don't know what the mechanisms are around that. How they'll cope with it in their meetings, because local board engagement isn't full-time by any means on the part of many of the members. The level of complication and complexity is quite considerable. So how will this actually work in practice? And are you proposing to have some form of trial period just to see whether some aspects maybe don't work to the extent that you'd want to devolve decision making?
Through the chair, thank you for the question, Councillor Walker. Before I pass over to Justine, I'd just like to make some perhaps comments on the overall vision of this. So this has been a question that we've been we've been exploring in detail, including at an ELT level, to ensure that the recommendations put forward are achievable and effective. And we have been very mindful of that, and we have done a lot of work to make sure we can understand how the process would work and how it would work well. Fundamentally, the governing body will ultimately be responsible still for the budget allocation to local boards. And then within that budget allocation, our teams will be working with the local boards to give them advice on investment decisions and decisions around their local community assets as part of the local board work programs. Those local board work programs will be developed in unison, so that's the intensive portion of the work. And then we will continue to work with local boards to give them the advice around how they may or may not be able to make trade-off decisions within their local board investment recommendations. Justine, is there anything that you would like to add to that I may have missed?
Thank you, Claudia. Yes, I'll just respond to the question about how local boards are anticipated to make decisions together. So Justine mentioned in his summary introduction that we are continuing to do further work on multi-board services and are preparing to come back to a workshop with the Joint Governance Working Party on that item before seeking local board feedback on that for further advice to be provided to the governing body. So the important aspect, I think, to remember at the moment is that the regional policies and strategies will still very much guide the advice that we provide to local boards with regards to the provision of services and assets within their local board area, and that remains in place. As Claudia said, the areas which we will explore further will be identified with local boards through their local board plans and through their local board work programs. But the policy settings very much remain the same and will guide the advice that we provide. In terms of your question too around the capacity of local board members to participate, local board services colleagues or Phil might like to comment further, but I know that this has come up in earlier workshops and excuse me, we are of the view that the time and effort that local board members currently spend on advocacy with the governing body can be redirected to decision making in terms of local community services. So we think that the effort is already applied, it's just applied in an advocacy sense instead of in a decision making sense, which is what will change as a result of this decision. Thank you.
Okay, supplementary question. Have you done some active testing, looking at specific examples across local boards to actually work out how it works and how practical it is? So have you done some test bed work?
We have work underway at the moment to prepare for engagement with local boards through the local board plan development process at the moment. We've also prepared some scenarios, some examples, I guess, of how this will work in practice, which we have shared previously as well with governing body. So yes, we have certainly done thinking about what this will look like in practice. There's no question that the early implementation will also provide us lots of learning. So we feel well prepared, but it's not until we're actually doing this in practice that there will be additional learnings, which will mean we'll need to continue to refine this as we progress.
And just further to that, have you got some KPIs, some criteria around monitoring and management so that you are actively monitoring and managing, and against a background where maybe some of your principles might be unworkable, that you're able to make changes, because quite obviously we're interested in value for money and not achieving a situation where we're throwing money at something because of a principle that may sound fine, but the people buying the service are totally ambivalent, I would suggest. They just want as effective delivery as they can. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think as we conveyed in the governing body workshop on the 1st of June, this very importantly aligns with the direction for local community services that was adopted through the last long-term plan. So absolutely appreciate the requirement to have a really clear focus on value for money. And as Claudia described, the decision-making around funding remains with the governing body. So we believe that this enables us to work really proactively with local boards to make sure we can help provide advice that enables them to manage within those funding envelopes.
Thank you very much. Next question's in the name of Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
Thanks. One of my questions is already answered, Mr. Mayor, and that was about the clustering of local boards. That's good news. Potentially deliver some good cost savings and advantages to communities. Procurement, Claudia, how's that going to work? Is it going to be done at all local boards be given the power to do procurement at a local level for local facilities?
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Cashmore. Justine, I might ask you to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. That's a very good question. Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. I think that's an area that we need to explore further in terms of how we move forward. The full facilities contracts, for example, will remain in place, but provide the flexibility for us to accommodate changes that are made through local boards. In terms of the overall approach of us seeking to partner more intentionally with our communities, absolutely, that's a procurement opportunity. But again, probably the downstream effects of some of the initial advice that we need to provide. So there's certainly opportunities for us to be working far more intentionally and closely with community. We need to start with identifying those opportunities with local boards first, providing the advice about how that can work, and then making sure we've got the structures in place to ensure that's effective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Richard Hills.
Kia ora, Mayor, and thank you. And it's probably slightly my fault for assuming what the came out, but how do I follow back where the local boards individually, where their feedback is on this? Because looking over the last agenda, I was on parental leave when the original decision was made. I just can't follow what all the local boards support on this right now. Is there anywhere that I could quickly find that? Usually it would be in the agenda attachments, but I can't see that.
Or if maybe we can give a summary to Councillor Hills of the view of the local boards.
Yep.
So come to Justine for that.
Cool, we can try and do that. But the report on the 28th of October, which was that substantial report, did have a lot of feedback from the local boards. And also the feedback of the local boards on the annual plan. 7 local boards provided feedback on these proposals, and all 7 local boards supported this proposal.
Yeah, it's just the 28th. Yeah, I wasn't here on the 28th, but it only mentions the numbers of local boards, but not individually who they were. So maybe I'm just looking in the wrong place. But
we can.
So
that was probably my fault, or not.
If I can just add to that, through the report on the 28th of October, we did report that 20 of the 21 local boards supported these proposals. We can provide the fuller detail of the formal feedback that we receive from local boards, but to assure you that they have formally participated in providing feedback on these proposals, and overwhelming support from local boards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Last question.
I guess my oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Councillor.
Decision, sorry, it's a real weird delay today. It's never happened like this before. So sorry about that. The the funding decisions that were they made on the 28th of October, and this is, so the structure and the way the funding made change to local boards, was that already made at that meeting, and this is just endorsing the implementation?
So the current funding envelope stays as is, but there is that additional funding policy work that is still happening. So it has been approved in principle to go ahead, but the governing body will be approached in the future months with that additional work that is happening with that additional funding policy. So it's still to happen and hopefully to be implemented through the LTP process.
Okay, I guess it was more the changes to the envelopes of future funding for each individual local board.
So the current envelopes will stay as is, so that's not changing. So no local board will be funded less than what they are currently funded. It's the additional funding based on equity. That work is still happening, and it'll come back to the governing body for feedback and decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think the point is that we decided to make a decision about devolution, but we also recognised there was a need to make a decision about equity of funding, one board compared to another. That involves some more complex work. It absolutely needs to be done because some boards are clearly underfunded, but we're doing that as a separate exercise. That might have been the discussion we had at the meeting that you were absent from, Councillor. Can I just throw in the last question? This is essentially about devolution in line with the principle of subsidiarity. To what extent is this consistent with the directions that were given at the time that the amalgamated so-called super city was set up, and to what extent is this consistent with views of the Local Government Commission?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I might pass this one to Justine. Thank you, Justine.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you for the question, Chair. So absolutely it is consistent with the intentions of outlined in Legaka and consistent with the report recommendations received from the Local Government Commission as well. So that is the basis on which this work has been was first started and it has been continuing for quite some time, as Claudia described at the beginning.
Thank you very much for that. I have no other questions, and at the moment I have no requests for comments. Yes, I do. Councillor Daniel Newman is the first comment. Councillor Newman?
Oh, look, thank you, Your Worship. I just want to, if I may, acknowledge Justine and Claudia and Gary Pemberton and Phil Wilson and Gareth Stuyven and all the officers and those who have provided their consultancy to inform the work over this long marathon innings, because this is an important piece. Your Worship, I think your question was absolutely appropriate, and ultimately this isn't really about what we as a governing body might consider to be an appropriate allocation. This is about seeking to give effect to what the statutory framework says around the establishment of local boards under this co-governance model for Auckland. Local boards have a statutory function and we need to give effect to that, and it's taken some time, but I think this is an important step, Your Worship. I mean, ultimately, I think in the body of the report, paragraph 23 spells it out. The proposed changes to the allocation of decision-making included giving increased decision-making to local boards by enabling them to make decisions on existing and new service assets, their specific location, design, build and fit out within budget parameters agreed with the governing body through the local board agreement process. That is precisely what needs to happen here, and this will help to achieve that. And I do want to acknowledge the officers too, because concurrent to this, the issue of the equity funding model continues. It has been a pleasure working with officers throughout this term as chair of the Joint Governance Working Party to be able to progress this discussion. It hasn't been the easiest. It isn't the sexiest piece of work. It's probably one of the most meaningful pieces of work for me, Your Worship. And can I just say that you have asked reasonable questions throughout, and it hasn't. You've been one of the tougher critics, I think, to persuade on this, but I do acknowledge you in your support for this. As I said to a group of residents over the weekend, Your Worship, we've had the political debate around the budget. That debate is over now from my perspective. And next week we do have to pass that budget to ensure supply. And it will have my support too, because we need to ensure supply to keep the lights on and to keep the staff employed. And that will include the staff that will be required to resource this piece of work. And it's important because ultimately I think that there are efficiencies in having those people who are part of the co-governance arrangement, who are closest to the consequences of decisions, having to take responsibility for those decisions, because I think that's an efficient model. They have a better line of sight to the operational decisions around assets and facilities than anybody else sitting around this table. So I feel that's appropriate. So thank you very much to the officers and to you, Your Worship. I actually think this is a really important piece of work, and it's a legacy outcome I think you can take some pride in. I think this will be a good outcome in terms of decision making. It will improve co-governance, and I look forward to its implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And acknowledgements to the staff and to the political leadership that's brought this forward. You're right, absolutely right, Mr. Mayor. In the setup of the Auckland Council, it's making decisions as close to where the decisions are affected is the most important. So that subsidiarity piece is what this is about. And yes, it might come with a cost for staff advice, but I'm placing my bet is that the actual results from those localised decisions making will actually save the council money and more importantly have better outcomes locally. So that's why my support's for this. It's about getting those decisions and getting the flex in that decision making to allow really advanced local outcomes locally. The big budget of Auckland Council has allowed us to do bigger balance sheet things, and that's been a success of that. But going through, we have lost a little bit of that localism. This I'm seeing as a way to start putting that back and get the appropriate amount of decision making locally with the accountability that goes with it, and that's very important as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. I've got no further comments. Actually I have. Councillor Al Filipina. My apologies, Councillor Filipina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Your Worship, like many around the table today, I've been part of this, the corridor since 2017. And I know in recent months I've sort of had a look at the fiscal responsibilities we have, and as a result looked at the monies that have been approved, but also looked at it as a savings from between $6 to $8.4 million, excuse me, over to the 3 years. And so, Chair, I was looking at putting an amendment through, which obviously I won't be, and that's as a result of a corridor I had with Phil Wilson. I now find myself, as a result of what's just been said by Councillor Newman, but also with all the other workshops, but more importantly, the advice from Phil Wilson, I will be supporting the recommendations, because I think one of the key things, and the Deputy Mayor just mentioned it, is that even though we may have saved 6 to 8.4 million over the 3 years, what we haven't taken into account is any savings achieved by the local boards optimising their spend as well. So the team have been complimented by those who have spoken, and even yourself, Your Worship, through a lot of the meetings we have had. But again, I just want to acknowledge and say thank you to Phil Wilson. And I will be supporting the recommendations. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am very mindful that Sandra would like us all to be brief today and succinct. So this is something that had to happen. I've been arguing for it when we went through governance reviews earlier. I welcome it. I really applaud the leadership that we've seen on it, and I'd like to thank Daniel for the careful way in which he has brought everybody together. I think it's going to result in better decision-making capabilities, efficiencies, and I think greater trust in democracy. So I think today this is a good decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the succinct comments. If I can just finish this discussion, as Councillor Newman said, I began this process with a degree of scepticism, and that was partly around the fact that it adds costs to do devolution, and it does, you know, the 2.8 million that we're setting aside, partly because I didn't want to see this as the beginning of a process that would see the re-emergence of 21 different borough councils when we had successfully amalgamated and were planning and providing services of a uniform standard across the council. And thirdly, I had concerns around assets that crossed ward lines. You know, you might live in one ward and the asset might be just over the border, but you're not concerned about whether it's in your ward or not. You simply want to have access to the asset, which may be a swimming pool or whatever. I was equally aware that part of what we were trying to do with creating a super city was to retain a sense of localism and to ensure that local boards did have a meaningful role to play on facilities that were in their local area and were by definition local. And I think the concept that one size fits all is wrong, in the sense that our communities across the region are often different communities and with different priorities. And this allows each of those communities to determine through their local board which assets they want to sustain and which they may wish to dispose of in favour of reinvesting in another asset. And the needs and requirements of Rodney may be different, for example, to the needs and requirements of Otara Papatoetoe. So I think the concept of subsidiarity is a correct concept. I hope that the government looks more closely at subsidiarity as a way of devolving funding to Auckland Council as the council that has regional responsibilities, and that would be a good thing as well. There is an element of risk in this, but there is an element of benefit and an element of ensuring that what we're doing community by community actually is what makes sense to those particular communities. And we do have some safeguards in terms of voting the overall money that will be available to the local boards, and ensuring that in areas where there needs to be decent minimum standards right across the region, that we establish those standards. And those minimum standards are reviewable over time, and if difficulties arise out of this process of devolution, then we can look again at those minimum standards to see how they might recover the situation. So on that basis, I'll be supporting these resolutions. So the recommendations are in front of you. So I'm going to put those recommendations on the voices if there's no objection.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I had my hand up and I didn't think that you were finishing because you hadn't moved it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. No, I'm happy. Sorry, I didn't have it on my list here, but Councillor Cooper, please, if you can finish.
It was just a quick comment around the thing around opting in or not to those sub-regional type of facilities. I'd hope that we would look at that again, because I'll just give one example. For example, Te Manawa Library, right? That's accessed by at least 3 local boards. But for example, if Henderson Massey was struggling to do something there, and then Rodney and Upper Harbour said, no, our people can use it, but we're not helping you. You know, I think that there needs to be a bit of a determination. For example, if we finally got a pool in the northwest, that would be exactly the same. And I think you've got to be able to, there might need to be a determination to say, look, this has to be sub-regional because look at the catchment that you're using, that sort of thing. I think to have the ability to not opt in is kind of it depends who gets elected. You know, I think we don't want to leave it to the flavour of a board. We need to think about the community that facility serves, not the whim of which local board. So I'd hope that you'd look at that. That's the one thing I really don't like about it. We need to determine the sub-regional stuff because it's supposed to be working with council anyway, with governing body anyway in that model. And then the governing body might say, look, we actually need a couple more to step up, and they don't have to. So I might have got the wrong end of the stick, but that's how it appears to me. If 3 communities are sharing something a lot, they need to step up. Each local board needs to step up to be part of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. There being no further speakers, I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Those against? I declare that carried. I don't hear any voices in dissent. So I'll declare that passed unanimously. We come now to item number 12, which relates to a grant to the Auckland Returned